Again, Melissa, welcome to Aloma Church in Winter Park, Florida. I know you're not a stranger to this area, and Speaker Newt Gingrich, welcome here. We all have been waiting for you, and obviously you can see you have an enthusiastic response. What we're going to do is we're going to have some questions for you from the people on the panel here. There will be some questions of their own. They also may read some questions that we've also received from the people here in the audience. And then at the end, we'll give you some time to be able to sum up, and we appreciate you here. First question is going to come from Patricia Sullivan.
Speaker Gingrich, you have voiced admiration for Theodore Roosevelt, FDR, and Woodrow Wilson. Given their progressive policies, conservatives would like to know why the admiration.
Well, I actually don't remember much about admiring Woodrow Wilson, although he was smart, taught political science. In the case of Theodore Roosevelt, he came to personify the emerging American nationalism. He was the advocate of the modern Navy. He was the advocate of reform. In New York City, for example, he led the cleanup of corruption. He led the troops up San Juan Hill and was in many ways the most famous military hero of his generation. He wrote, as a very young man, he wrote a standard work on the history of the Naval War of 1812, which to this day is a standard work. And then in passing, he wrote a leading book on birds in New York State. He was a conservationist. He was not an environmentalist. He would erase the EPA in a minute. But he loved the outdoors. There's a wing of the American Museum of Natural History, one of my very favorite places, which is named for him and has a statue of him. So that's Roosevelt. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's real simple. We get attacked on December 7th, 1941 by the Japanese. In 3 years and 8 months, we defeat Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan in what is probably the best fought war in terms of strategy and structure in history. And Roosevelt was part of that. By the way, the other person who really admired Franklin Delano Roosevelt was named Ronald Wilson Reagan, and Ronald Wilson Reagan on Roosevelt's 100th anniversary gave a speech on why he mattered. And so I would say to you, I am not such a partisan that I would automatically say I don't want to even look at somebody who did something historic because they're a Democrat. And I am not such an ideologue that I'm not going to look and say some of the things. I'll give you one other thing. Theodore Roosevelt supposedly was eating breakfast when he read a novel called The Jungle, in which a man falls into a vat in Chicago and is turned into sausage. And supposedly, Theodore Roosevelt was eating sausage at the time he read this section. And supposedly, that afternoon, he set up the Food and Drug Administration. Now, I just want to tell all of you, I'm a pretty solid conservative. But I like to travel anywhere in America and think the water can be drinkable. I like to be able to buy food at the grocery store or at a fast food place and think it's edible. And there are certain minimums. I understand libertarians have a theory that at least your descendants could sue if you die. I don't find that an adequate substitute for not dying. I take one more person. You were very generous and mentioned close to. I also want to say my younger daughter, Jackie Cushman's here, and we're thrilled to have her with us today.
Speaker Gingrich is going to come from Alfonso Aguilar, who is with the Latino Partnership for Conservative Principles.
Mr. Speaker, as you will know, Latinos are passionately for life. However, today in America, 22% of abortions are performed on Latina women. There's an urgency to stop this crime. Professor Robbie George, the founder of American Principles Project, a Princeton professor, has suggested that we may not have to wait for the Supreme Court to revoke Roe versus Wade, that based on the 14th Amendment, the US Congress could pass a law stating that a person comes into being at conception. Would you consider that strategy to advance the cause of life?
That's a very, very good question. But I have to say just 1 second to note, you can tell who the center of power is up here. Notice the only guy who's not holding a microphone. Very impressive. I've talked with Robbie George about this at length. Robbie George, for those of you who don't know him, is an absolutely brilliant professor at Princeton who has been thinking very deeply about the question of religious liberty in America and the implications of our religion for public policy. And he is really, I think, one of the great intellectual leaders of our time. And I've told Robbie that I think there's a very good possibility if we could elect a majority to the Senate, which would be 60 votes for practical purposes, and we could elect a solid majority in the House, which is why if I become the nominee, I'm going to want to run a team campaign to make sure that the team wins on a team agenda. I would favor passing a bill defining personhood beginning at conception and limiting the court's ability to have the bill reviewed, both of which are legal in my judgment. And we wrote a paper. If you go to my website, newt.org, there's a paper on rebalancing the judiciary, which Vince Haley helped write, which we've worked on for 9 years. And I believe the judiciary is totally out of control, that is violating the Constitution. And so I would be very much in favor of recentering the system and recognizing that the Founding Fathers wanted a balance of power between the three branches. They didn't want the judiciary to be above the legislative and executive branches. And I think the 14th Amendment is Let me say one other thing. One of the reasons we have so many abortions is that the federal government funds Planned Parenthood. And the fact is, Planned Parenthood is the largest single provider of abortions in the United States. I would move actively as president to defund Planned Parenthood, take all of that money, I want to take all of that money and put it into adoption services so that young women can choose life rather than death.
From Florida Family Policy Council, maybe a follow-up.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for being here tonight with us. Questions regarding stem cell research. Several years ago, Oprah Winfrey had a show, and she had Michael J. Fox and Dr. Oz. And to Michael J. Fox's amazement, Dr. Oz began to show very clearly that now adult stem cells that do not require the destruction of a human embryo are actually more vibrant and more strong and more powerful in research than our embryo. So he actually showed there's no need for it to begin with. The question is regarding existing lines of stem cells now. In other words, existing embryonic people in very small form. Would you support research and or funding for the destruction and research of those embryos?
I would eliminate all funding for any stem cell research which came from the killing of life. That a lot of us, I think, weren't smart enough to pick up on earlier. This was never an argument about science. This was the use of science to justify desensitizing the society to killing babies. The people who wanted to pick a fight over stem cell research were not interested. If you walked in and said to them, I can do all the research you want without having to use embryos, they would have rejected it because their goal was to have a fight over the use of embryos to be able to pit. Do you really want to have a person who has Parkinson's not have any hope? And after all, this is, quote, only an embryo. And that was a very deliberate effort and the further effort of the secular left to desensitize us to the fact that every one of us is endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we have to reassert the sacredness of life as a gift of God.
next question is from Keith Mason of Personhood USA.
Speaker Gingrich, earlier this month, the Population Research Institute reported on a Massachusetts District Court judge who ruled that a 32-year-old woman with various mental health issues could be coaxed, bribed, or even enticed by ruse to abort her child and then be sterilized. There's growing movement to diminish the personhood of the handicapped and the elderly in America. As president, what would you do to expose and to fight against this eugenics movement?
There are some horrifying novels about people in Germany in the 30s trying to save their children. Because the eugenics movement led to, after all, this child has a problem, we're going to purify ourselves, and therefore you should turn your child in and kill them. And the novels are, I mean, they're just gut-wrenching about the desperate effort of mothers and fathers to save their children. The eugenics movement, and people forget that Planned Parenthood grew out of the eugenics movement, believed that somehow if you could prune the human race, you'd end up with a better genetic quality. Now, the greatest of all sins is hubris. It is the belief that you can become God. And this is an act of believing we can become God, that we are so wise that we know who's worthy of living and who isn't. We know who can contribute and who can't. And it's a fundamental violation of the essence of religion. And so I would say to you that, was that a district judge or a Massachusetts, a U.S. judge or a Massachusetts judge?
It's a district.
U.S. district judge?
Massachusetts.
Oh, a Massachusetts state judge. Okay. Oh, that's the problem people in Massachusetts should handle. But I was checking in. Oh, it's a little bit like Christmas. I'm making a list. I'm checking it twice. You know. I know I want to go after Judge Barry in San Antonio, who issued the anti-religious bigoted ruling on June 1st, and I was just seeing whether this was a new federal judge I should add to my list. But I do believe we have to stand firm and say to the legal class, we are not going to tolerate you desensitizing being a human being, and we are prepared to take steps to defend ourselves from an aggressive judgeship that thinks it can dictate to us the very nature of our relationship to God.
From Darlene Ramundi from Maitland, Florida. How do you convince skeptics that you can defeat Barack Obama if you are the nominee?
I mean, I don't know if I would convince skeptics, but people who have an open mind, it's pretty straightforward. In 1980, I worked with the Reagan campaign. Ronald Reagan ended up beating Jimmy Carter by a bigger number of states than Franklin Roosevelt beat Herbert Hoover by. In 1984, I worked with the Reagan campaign. He carried 49 states. In 1988, when Bush was down by 19 points, I got involved in defining Dukakis, and that was in May, and by November, Bush won by 6, which meant that 1 out of every 4 Americans switched between May and November. In 1994, we designed a totally positive campaign called The Contract with America. The largest one-party increase in American history was 1994. For an off-year election, we gained 9 million votes over 1990. The Democrats lost 1 million votes. We controlled the House for the first time in 40 years. In 1996, I designed a campaign knowing we'd probably lose the presidency. So we had to get re-elected to a majority in the House while having Clinton win on the Democratic side. It is the first time we had a re-elected majority since 1928. So I've had a fairly long experience of trying to figure out how do you communicate with the American people and how do you get this done. Now let's look at the other team. We nominated a moderate in 1996. Failed. Go back and look at the film of the debates. Couldn't distinguish himself. We nominated a moderate in 2008. Go back and look at the debates. If we nominate a moderate, we are in real trouble. It's that simple. Here's a simple illustration. Despite all these various attack ads that are so phony that even Rush Limbaugh was taking them apart, Sarah Palin wrote an article about him yesterday. Don Wildman came out today and said some very strong things. Look, They're silly. It's nonsense. I've been around longer than some of you have been alive. I have a very long track record. It's always been Republican, unlike my major opponent, who voted in the Democratic primary in 1992 and gave money to Democratic congressional candidates. I have been an active conservative. I went to a Goldwater organizing meeting in Columbia, South Carolina in 1964. I mean, this idea that I'm not a conservative, voters are being goofy. So start with that. I can run a campaign with Obama where I'm over here and he's over there. So far apart that most of his $1 billion of attack ads will fall in the middle and be irrelevant. You can't take something like Romneycare, which has tax-paid abortions and has Planned Parenthood written in by name. You can't take Romneycare and Obamacare and have a rational debate. They're not different. That's just a fact. So I believe I have a dramatically better chance of winning this fall than anyone else we could nominate, given the current field.
In Winter Park, Florida. Should you become president, what steps would you take to undo our nation's movement towards socialism under this administration? And what will you do differently to cause the two houses to agree on necessary spending cuts to the deficit?
It's a very good question. Of course, we're watching one of the great failures of government in our lifetime. You have a president who is totally incompetent and a radical. And you're allowed to be one or the other, but you're both a really wrong. You have a Democratic Senate at a time when the Senate's almost totally dysfunctional anyway, and you've got a Republican House, and so you have a mess. And how do you unlock that? Well, when Reagan won in 1980, Tip O'Neill was Speaker. If we were going to pass the Reagan economic program, we had to get one of every 3 Democrats, and we did. When I got to be Speaker in 1994, Bill Clinton was President. If I wanted to move from speeches to achievement, I had to get his signature, and he had to get me to schedule the vote. And we had really hard knockdown, drag-out negotiations. So we reformed welfare, we cut taxes, we strengthened intelligence, we balanced the budget with a bill that led to 4 consecutive balanced budgets. So you can do these things. And Callista used to be the chief clerk of the House Agriculture Committee, which is a very bipartisan committee. I used to serve on Public Works Administration and House Administration, which are bipartisan. One of the things I'll do as president, immediately after the election, is I will seek to meet individually with every Democrat in the House and Senate, not the leadership, but every single member, including the leadership. And I'll say to them, look, we're going to be together for the next 4 years. Under what circumstance can you help America and put America first? And what is it we could do to achieve something together? And just try to lower the temperature, try to create a new mood and a new attitude. Second, I'm going to pick fights where we're at 75 or 80 or 85% approval. Ronald Reagan taught me this. He used to say, I try to turn up the light for the American people so they turn up the heat on the Congress. So you pick the kind of fight where the Congress decides, there's nothing like going home to 5 or 6 consecutive town hall meetings to convince you maybe you really were for that all along. And so that's part of it. Lastly, I'm going to take a number of steps on day one. If you go to newt.org and look at our 21st century contract, it breaks into 4 units. The first unit's legislation. I will ask the brand new Congress on January 3rd to stay in session and to pass 3 things before I'm sworn in. Repeal Obamacare. Repeal Dodd-Frank, which is killing small business, killing that's a major answer to Florida's problem with housing, because Dodd-Frank is an anti-housing bill that depresses the price of housing. And third, repeal Sarbanes-Oxley, which is all red tape and regulation and no power. And we're going to campaign this fall on this. So we're going to put every member of both parties to the test. Are you willing to stay in when you come back on the 3rd and get these 3 done, so on the 20th I could sign all 3 into law? Second, on the second part is executive orders. 2 hours after I'm sworn in, after the inaugural address, we will stop and I will sign a series of executive orders, all of which will have been posted by October 1st on the internet, so everybody knows this is coming. The first executive order will abolish all of the White House czars as The second executive order will reinstate Ronald Reagan's Mexico City policy, no funding for abortion by any country. The third executive order will reinstate George W. Bush's conscience policy. No doctor, no nurse, no hospital will be forced to undertake anything against their religious beliefs. Executive order will move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. We're going to have a bunch more. In fact, if you have ideas, you can go to Newt.org and send in your ideas. We'll have a whole bunch more. My personal goal is, by the time Barack Obama lands in Chicago, we will have dismantled 40% of his government. We're working on an executive order right now that would reinstate the Keystone Pipeline so Canada could be allowed.
Is that all the executive orders? I'm sure you'll
enough for one day.
I'm sure we'll find a lot more that we need to address. John Stenberg, the next question.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, one of the issues that's very hot here in Florida is casino gambling. They're trying to put casinos all over the place, not just in South Florida, but give pari-mutuels parity and to be all over the place. Our good friend Rick Tyler, who had your super PAC, just recently talked about the fact that I guess $10 million from casino heads have gone to fund these super PACs, but you have no control over them. Can you do something to reassure us about your position on casino gambling? And even talk about, can the president have any effect at all, positive or negative, on the issue of casinos and gambling?
Well, let me say up front, at the risk of offending some of my friends who have been very helpful, I worry not just about casino gambling, I worry about lotteries. I worry about the degree to which the poor are the most likely to end up spending a large percent of their income gambling in the false hope that they can mathematically be consistent. I want to start there. Now, I have read articles, I don't know anything technically, I have not been briefed because it's illegal, but I've read articles, and Sheldon Adelson has clearly, according to the articles, been very generous. Sheldon Adelson's passion in life is the survival of Israel. And he and I are in agreement that Iran is a deep, immediate threat, posing the risk of a second Holocaust if 3 or 4 nuclear weapons go off. And so Sheldon has said, to offset, by the way, the Goldman Sachs, the big banks, and everybody who's been helping my opponent, he stepped in and said, look, I really want somebody to be there who understands foreign policy, who understands national security, and who has been, I was called at one time, the best Speaker of the House in terms of Israel that we've ever had, because I thoroughly understand how dangerous that part of the world is. So I'm happy to tell you, my relationship with Sheldon is about a very specific public thing. I believe we should be strong enough to stop the Iranians, and that Israel should be allowed to exist, and I'm prepared to defend them.
The Tea Party movement has encouraged citizens to get engaged and get informed. Research has led some to label you a New World Order, One World Government Bilderberger. Are they right?
You know, that's a list worthy of Mitt Romney ad. I mean, that's. I am a very strong defender of American sovereignty. I co-chaired a task force in the United Nations with Senator George Mitchell, which called for the United Nations to be radically overhauled, and prepared to issue a special order blocking Agenda 21 from being implemented. I have never been to a Bilderberg meeting, and it almost sounds like a novel, frankly. And I am committed deeply and passionately to American exceptionalism and the principle that our rights come from our Creator, that we are different, and that we should never allow American exceptionalism to be submerged in any kind of international order, because by definition, most of the world has not yet found a constitutional system that protects their rights. So I think my record is pretty clear.
That question go to Alfonso Aguilar.
Thank you.
Immigration.
Immigration is an important issue to the country. We've heard the proposals from different candidates, sometimes speaking in generalities. It strikes me that your position, your plan, it's a unique plan, and you've managed to frame it in conservative terms. The importance of the rule of law and border security, but also the importance of and centrality of the family, and the importance of the free market. Could you expand on your vision and your plan on immigration?
Sure. Let me start and say, President Bush tried to pass a comprehensive bill and failed. President Obama tried to pass a comprehensive bill and failed. I've worked on this issue off and on since the 1980s, and Ronald Reagan writes about it in his diary. He says the reason he signed the Simpson-Mazzoli Act of 1986 is we have to get control of our border, and we have to have a guest worker program with employer sanctions. So we didn't get the two things he said we had to have, but we did in fact end up giving amnesty to a substantial number of people. And I look back on that, and it was a loss. I mean, if we had controlled the border as of 1986, and if we had had a legal guest worker program as of 1986, we would be dramatically better off today as a country. So the dream was there, the ideas were there, but the implementation wasn't. So I've tried to think through step by step. First of all, I think it's a series of steps, not one bill. The first step has to be absolute control of the border by January 1, 2014. We're doing two things that are different. One is we're drafting a bill based on the principles of World War II that basically gives the person in charge of controlling the border the ability to move without environmental impact statements and without all the various federal red tape, and just get it done by January 1, 2014. Second, I have said publicly, there are 23,000 Department of Homeland Security employees in the DC area. I am prepared to move up to half of them to Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona if we need the extra manpower to go to the border. Part two, English should be the official language of government. Getting to be an American citizen should require a deeper knowledge of American history than we currently require. And frankly, getting a high school diploma should require a deeper knowledge of American history. We are a unique civilization, and we are a learned civilization, and if you don't learn it, you can't actually survive very long, and the country won't survive long. So now, number four, we should have dramatic improvements in the efficiency and the friendliness of our legal visa program. We want people to come here as tourists. We want them to come here for business. We want them to come here for as students. Today, it's crazy. It is harder to get into the U.S. legally than it is to get into the U.S. illegally. Now that is exactly backwards. So we should make it easier to be here legally. Fifth, we We should make it much easier to deport people who should not be here, starting with MS-13 gang members and other gang members. And there's no reason it should take longer than, if you're not a U.S. citizen, we do not have to give you all of the appeals process. We should have an ability to say, we should have a guest worker program, which I would outsource to American Express, Visa, or MasterCard, because they know how to fight fraud, and the U.S. government is hopeless. When you have a guest worker program, I would dramatically increase the economic penalties for any company that hires somebody who's illegal. They have a program that can swipe a card, it's easy, they have no excuse. Now you get to the challenge. We have millions of people here. I believe once you create that kind of program, a very substantial number will go home. They'll apply for a guest worker to be here legally. The group I singled out, and here I've been frankly surprised, although the other night I watched Governor Romney sort of dance a half step closer to my position. But initially he really hammered me and they ran ads about amnesty and all that stuff. I said, look, you got a grandmother or a grandfather. They've been here 25 years. They're married. They got kids, they got grandkids. They've been paying their bills for 25 years, and they belong to your local church. Now, do you really believe the American people are going to deport them? Do you think we're going to go in and take a grandmother and ship her home? I don't. And so the question becomes, is there a model that gets us to legality without amnesty, and to legality without citizenship, and has human judgment? So I went back and looked at the World War II draft process, the Selective Service, which was a citizen project. And I said, what if we had citizen review boards? You could only apply if you had truly deep ties to the community. You could only apply if you could prove you'd been a good member and you've been paying your bills and you've been responsible. And you could only apply if an American family sponsored you. Now, should a person who fit that criteria have the opportunity to get a certificate for residence but not citizenship? And if they did, and they want citizenship, then they go back to their home country. They file exactly as they would if they were still in their home country. And while they have residence so they can come back, they don't get citizenship until that goes through the entire waiting line. And frankly, in some of these countries, if you're a grandmother or grandfather, the waiting line is pretty darn long. So I think it's not perfect, but it is doable. And within 5 years, we could be a country in which we'd be at above 99% of the people here would be legal in one form or another. And I think that is a responsible conservatism that tries to solve problems. Let me just say, first of all, I'm really honored that the former Attorney General, who many of you know, Bill McCollum, is here, and that it's great privilege. He's a great leader, and we're thrilled to have him as one of our coaches. These are, Mr. These are two of our state co-chairs that we're very, very honored to have them. I'm also thrilled that Jose Malaya, who ran Marco Rubio's campaign, is running our campaign, and it's given us a huge, huge advantage. I'll just say something very briefly. I'm very honored by this opportunity, and I think my record in the community of working on these kind of issues is pretty long and pretty complete. I'll make 3 quick points. This is the most important election of your lifetime. And we have to get it right to defeat Obama decisively. And we have to defeat Obama decisively at the team election because we want to change more than the Oval Office. We want to change the judiciary, we want to change the bureaucracy, we want to change the laws. That's a tall order under our Constitution. So you need somebody who actually knows how to run a team campaign on a large scale and who knows how to actually get things done in Washington. And we've tried an amateur for the last 3 years. And the truth is, while he may be good at business, Governor Romney has never had one day of experience trying to get something done in Washington on a big scale. And that's part 1. Part 2. We have to have a conservative, Otherwise, we're going to be as frustrated with the Republican as we were with the Democrat. And three, I have great respect for my good friend Rick Sidwell. And he's a terrific person. We've known each other for, I guess, 20 years now. But the fact is, he's not going to win in Florida. There's only one possibility for a conservative victory in Florida, in every poll. We're tied in the last poll that came out last night. 35 for Romney, 35 for me, and 11 for Sidwell. And so my point is, if you talk to, because all of you have friends who like Rick, and that's just a fact. He's a very attractive, desirable person with a great personal family story.
Next time around.
And yeah, next time around is a good battle cry. He's young enough he can show back up. But please just try to convince your friends. The only effective, practical, conservative vote on Tuesday is for Newt Gingrich, because that's just a fact. I need your help. Thank you very, very much.